That's very generous. I'm going to talk to you about interrogating appearances, or that's what I phrased the presentation to be, because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my practice, which was the invitation, but also my practice in a wider context around the field of drawing in the UK and the field of drawing more broadly. So in terms of talking about interrogating appearances, over an extended period of time, I can make everything work. I've been working, making large-scale drawings that explore the relationship of the female subject as an artist and as a model. And the background to that is clearly thinking about how we depict an appearance or an expression, or all of those ideas of gesture, presentation of a subject that we actually don't ever really see. And we talked yesterday about the selfie, and we talked about all sorts of other ways of documenting the self. I'm particularly interested in the idea that we don't see with a single lens, that we have a very elastic understanding of what we look like, how we present, and what it feels like to be inside a body. So seeing something else was a key drawing. I've been making these drawings for about 30 years as something as a continuum within the practice. But actually I make paintings, I do all sorts of things. So seeing something else is a drawing which was the moment of trying to depict actually what it was like to try and draw, and the idea that a self-portrait often looks back at you, as all of those selfies did that we looked at yesterday in some contorted form. But actually it's about the taking that headspace to reflect, to think about what it's like to have a relationship with a mirror, and to think about the uncomfortable relationship that there is between what you see, what's felt, and that inherent paradox. So this drawing, which comes out of a series of other works, has scraps of fabric, vestiges of fabric that's also talked to the idea of vestiges of skin and muscle. And it also talks, I put it at the beginning of the talk, partly because we had an awful lot of flies bobbing around yesterday. And this drawing is also about using something which talks to us about decay and decrepitude, actually as an adjutant between that mirror and the face itself. But the drawings are large scale. They're intended to have a relationship from a distance, so they are a relationship which uses the ground of the paper as a mirror, so it talks to the equivalence of that ground to the mirror and the relationship that I, as a subject and an object, if you like, have to that. And they're really talking about what it's like to scan the face, to scan the body, to scan that whole flat plane in order to identify and to visualise that whole relationship. So they talk about physical contortion, they talk about the act of looking, and they talk about the act of not looking back. So they're very much about being a witness in the present. And there is a subjectivity of rendering that's absolutely part of that whole process. So these heads are smaller heads just made as a series, and the drawings then stretch scale, so they're very much talking about an emotional emphasis, they're very much talking about a sense of presence. They're all made with carbon, with charcoal. They're very simple in their function and structure, and they talk very much about the idea of what it's like to talk about the skin of appearance, and to talk about how that might be revealed or not revealed. In themselves, they are an investigation of what it's like to become a spectator of the self and to form an equivalent to that negotiation. So they're very much about the negotiation, be that the negotiation between two lenses, the negotiation between what you see, what you record, and the way that you depict. So these drawings are quite large scale and quite often propped in a gallery space to take the space of the mirror, so that you have an informal relationship with it, which then becomes formal as you meet the image. The latest drawings which are on show, this is an install shot from South Shields, are a series of drawings which are just called Witness, and they're simply about the idea of being present, or trying to make drawings that accommodate what it's like to be present and to look and to not look, to see something you want to see or have seen, and have a different relationship with that. And it's as much about looking in the mirror as it is about the broader things going on in the world around it. So they're large scale, they're demanding in terms of the space they occupy. They're drawings that are made fluidly, they're made quickly, some would take a long time to negotiate that relationship. But they're certainly about seeing something else, and they're about positioning a space for something humanity, of something that responds to things. These were made across the summer period when we had all sorts of things happening, and in the isolation of the studio, absorbing all of those things and thinking about the reality of working on paper and working on something that is simply carbon, simply burnt wood, simply about talking about a presence. They're about recreating, so they're about forming a space to talk about the female subject. I think the last set are probably a bit more androgynous. It doesn't matter that they're not intended to look like you, they're meant to stand for a person, a presence, a context, a feeling, a sensation. There's a whole other set of work which relates to the practice of painting, which are about invented scenarios, but they're again quite often taking subjects within paintings that have female subject matter and then reinterpreting that. So this particular series, which is just to give you a sense of those more theatrical, more composed works that talk to album drawings and talk to other references around that kind of nature of a serial chronicling of an event, is that this is a story about Tristan and Iseult, which is translated through a whole set of tapestry paintings. But what's important is the female protagonists are given the space of the stage with their plotting, with their reappraisal of that subject matter. So they're active participants. And in terms of that headspace, this is a boardroom, it's my best kind of boardroom. It's my studio, and it's actually about that negotiation with the world. It's about the understanding it's where I see what I think. So it is that laboratory. It is about a process of finding what I want to depict within the world, but I have a certain set of frameworks within which I do that, which present a space for that open dialogue. I also make paintings. The studio shot was intended to give you a sense that this is part of the practice. I was asked to talk about the role of drawing, and I just wanted to situate my passion for drawing as being something which sits in complete parallel with the way that I operate. I draw my way through the day, I draw my way through meetings, I draw my way through that negotiated space to understand my position in the world and what I'm thinking. I also run something which is known as the German Drawing Prize. It actually began long before funding required it to be called that, and will continue into the future, which I've run since 1994. And again, it was about setting an open dialogue to think about what drawing was and what drawing could be, who's drawing, why are they making drawings, and what space does that have actually in this particular context. In the 90s, I was a head of painting at the University of Gloucestershire. It was a time when it was very difficult to get access to contemporary drawing, to see what people were making, and yet, for me, it is a fundamental tool for creative development. It's not for everyone, but actually it's something everybody uses in whatever form. And it was a process of thinking about how do you teach when you don't have that resource available for people. So the project started as a question, and then in 2009 I went overseas to run the National Art School, which was a project I found very fascinating because it was actually to remake a specialist small art school into an independent higher education provider which had drawing at the core of what it did. So I set up Drawing Projects UK, which for the last 2 years has had a project space, studios, a gallery, and I have the ambition to create a community through drawing in a fairly urban but run-down context. So the show, we develop a product, so it's an open call. I see it as an equivalent, if you like, of a conference for artists. So people submit their drawings on an annual basis. We have a whole changing set of selectors, and the work is judged solely on visual or oral or whatever form it comes in, merit. And it's a conversation between three people that changes in conversation and dialogue with the work that's presented. This is the show, part of the show installed at the Edge in Bath when it travelled here last year. But what the structure of the project was really to think about who talks about who is interested in the field of drawing, and actually let's get them, let's see if they'll come and look at other people's drawings. So part of the project was to see who was drawing, what were they drawing, and to get a whole set of people to come and talk about it. So from Doris Sarchi through to Mel Gooding and Andrew Brighton, through Cornelia Parker. Each year it changes, but we've always had a phenomenal set of people who've been willing to come and spend 2 days solidly immersed in looking at drawings. So we have about 3,000 drawings that come through, and a 2 solid day process of presenting the real thing. So Michael Greg Martin, Charlotte Mullins and Kate Brindley, to Michael Simpson, Helen Legg from Spike Island, David DeBosa. But each year a changing panel, always very phenomenal. And it looks like this, it's a physical process. It's not about the titles, the media, it's about facilitating 3 people to just look and to have a discussion about that. And of course facilitating the artists to present their work to people who they may never get to see their work in any other context, and also in terms of actually people who are drawing in their bedrooms and people who are highly professional, all in that same melting pot. So this is Rachel White-Reed, Ivona Blaswick from the Whitechapel, and Tim Marlowe, looking at a drawing as it came in. And that's what it takes. It's a project which involves, and this was really the core of it, was to provide access to students, not only to get professional training and access to how you handle work, how people present it, how do you administer it, how do you communicate with artists, but actually to see and witness that discussion and that dialogue. So we have a team every year that works with us. It's about 20 to 25 people, and they manage all of that. They work very closely with panels. That was Catherine DeSager from the Drawing Centre in New York with them, and they share that whole process. But the whole point of setting up this kind of slightly crazy project, a lot of very accidental projects. My accidental projects is another project to talk about. But the idea that my inquiry was simply to understand how we could get access to work, but actually out of that, a whole sense of understanding about the infrastructure, the dialogue, the debate, the way that we talk about drawing, and the way that we understand it through visual, physical, material means, and that we value that capacity and that knowledge within this process. So drawing is about communicating. It's about communicating in all sorts of different ways, whether it's felt, seen, heard, it might be about taste or smell, it might be all sorts of things that excite our senses. And it's something that we all do. So that project has a roll through into other contexts. We all draw from an early age. We've drawn for centuries. We've drawn these handprints all over the world for centuries. They're everywhere from Australia to Spain to wherever. So the idea that we need to see an imprint in the world to understand the scale that we are in the world is something that's a very long-standing need. We still have that need to imprint. And we've drawn onto rocks, we've drawn the things that you see, things that have a language that might be decorative, but it also might be animated in the way that it talks about the way a kangaroo's eyes might operate. But we're terribly committed to measuring things. Even when we find things, we measure them, we document them. So we document the documentation. We discover the world through drawing, so we discover it through a map. So we plan, we come from A to B through a line that we've drawn to translate that to the world. And even with our GPSs, it's simply a coded drawing, giving you that information. It's translated back into a drawing for us to follow. So that whole idea of measuring our worlds seems to be completely connected to the idea of very obvious drawing, but it's the drawing that actually is everything that we can touch, everything that we can reach, everything that we have within our parameter is actually within our physical environment. And that concept that then you would construct how you measure that further through the things like drawing machines, by the way that we would create a theatre for looking in medicine, so that all these beautiful structured theatres that you can witness the operation, the surgery, the drawing through skin with a knife, to then take that further forward into the theatre for drawing. So that whole relationship between anatomy and drawing actually having something about the context and the environment within which it operates. This is actually the life room at the National Art School in Sydney, where we converted the round chapel in the middle. It's a radial prism, so up and optical design. So we made a round life room because it had that conversation about the idea of looking and things at the centre. And then thinking about actually who is drawing. So we had the pleasure at Camberwell having John Berger come in to draw. He was asked, a bit like the think tank, to come in for the day to the drawing centre. And everybody thought John Berger might come in and talk about drawing. And John Berger had one request, was that he could just come and draw with other people. And that's what he did. So he drew alongside other people. And he was then in a conversation with actually another parent. So his whole commitment to being inside the institution was actually about creating, and that's what he said the arts means for him. So in terms of how we document the world, how we understand it, that whole relationship of looking and translating through drawing, being something that sits at the heart of that. These drawings by Warren Baldwin, he draws his wife every day, so he draws what's incredibly familiar every day, but it's not seen through the lens of the camera. It's seen with the analytical eye of the pencil and the hand and the eye and the way that you might trace that thinking. Someone like Sarah Simbler, who is probably in her 40s, who is somebody who has drawn in the anatomy field. She teaches anatomy at the Ruskin, and she teaches anatomy at UCL as an artist-trained anatomist, is someone who draws with a scalpel in order to reveal the bodily form. These drawings are not in the conventional anatomical drawings, they're in the convention of how you might reveal something by cutting away the layers of the skin, the muscle, discovering things like fat and how you might draw them. How do you find an equivalent to the act of drawing with a scalpel and revealing that form? To someone like Claude Heath, they're thinking about how you form an equivalent to the idea of a spine, which is codified. It's not done looking at it, it's done by feeling and coding those lines and those marks. Or someone like David Connion's drawing, which is called Holocene Cosgrave's Crime. It's about the sediment of that action. So they're made with him almost as a drawing machine, to think about that touch, but it's made with pen and ink. It's an incredible control, very meditative process to make something which is the span of his arms and the height, made from one space. So of course you understand the limits of the body, where the bottom edge is sedimented, but it's also where it doesn't quite reach once you get to follow that line. And we have things that interrupt systems. So this Bridget Lowe, which again is made, these are ruled lines, they're straight lines which are accreted and then just put out in the rain. So we break the systems. We like to measure and we like to break systems. But we might also like to think about how we include the experience of making within the made image. So landscapes that are made out in the rain, so the paper is worn by water. But things like this Jerry Davis drawing, which talk to us about how we use the language of drawing, the perspective of drawing, as well as the materiality, to think about floating through space. So you have, it's not very good with the lights up, little motifs of divers who float through a space of a ruined town that's devastated, everything is underwater. So it talks about flooding, it uses material that's graphite suspended in damar, it's on mylar, so it's slightly translucent, it's got the qualities of water encapsulated in the medium. But the space is shifting us through, and actually they're quite modest in size, but you are absorbed in the world because you suddenly realise you're following a floating sensation as you map that perspective. And we use measurement, we use plotting, we use tools to have a different language, to give different messages, so hidden messages within anamorphic distortion. So using, this is a treaty, which is presented as a drawing. So the document are the portraits of the three people making the secret treaty, which you can only see from the one angle, so I like to call them. And things which talk about probably not just measuring our world, but the kind of impotence within that. So this is a still from a level heavy documentation of performance with a piece of chalk, which of course is a background of his black suit, which of course by the end of the performance is obscured by the chalk and that whole process of which recreates the landscape, which talks to chalking and its origins, but it also talks to a futility of a process of labour. And drawing that might be documenting a space that it's in, but drawing as a public spectacle. So drawing that moves beyond being the private act or the private documentation to someone Zen who's based in Melbourne, who makes these performative drawings that absorb things that are happening in the space around her. And that's something which might be a private, small moment documented on a large scale. But the idea of the sketchbook, the private journal, the very elastic space within a sketchbook and a journal, it's your space. This is a project by Anita from her PhD, where actually the documentation of artists and how they use their sketchbook was then represented as an installation, so that you actually got to see into the private space of the sketchbook. There's something that you can't present particularly well, and that access of drawing and that headspace, it was an immensely privileging exhibition in terms of actually just listening to people talk about these very private spaces and what they were for, and the kind of mundanity of their use, but also their specialness or their privilegedness around that, but then to be absorbed in an installation that made it into a quiet space. But drawing for documentation, so we use drawing in very conventional ways. So this is Wendy Sharp, who's an Australian war artist out in East Timor. So it takes us to somewhere that the camera can't always go. So a place that couldn't be documented on film. And it also takes us to an experience which is first-hand and bringing that back in. This piece by Anna Mendes is it's in the Jerwood Drawing Prize at the minute in the Jerwood space. It's a drawing about how drawing is a drawing about, it's a film, it's a video, but it's about the role of drawing in communicating. And it's a particularly poignant film because it's actually about somebody who can't speak the language. And so in order to remember whose phone number she has, she makes a drawing. So the drawing is what identifies the person. So it becomes the direct, the obvious, the way in which to record, remember, communicate. It's no longer about writing a name, it's about making an image as that associative place. But drawing can be propositional. So Grimshaw's drawings for his buildings are all made in these books, they're all made with biro, they're all that size, they've all got blue covers, and they're all about these organic forms and shapes that then grow and transform. So we plot, we map, we diagram, we shape, so it has a role in everything that we do. And it has a very immediate function, and it also has a function where the equivalence of the medium, the language, the image might compress into something very tight, if you like, as an image, which carries so much weight and loaded meaning. So Concentrate by Paul Ryan is a drawing which looks like a fluid sketch of a concentration camp. It's made on Japanese tissue, it's a reproduction, it's a facsimile of a quick drawing in a sketchbook. It's made of little dots and dashes that make those marks. So it has everything about it is about the act of concentration. And of course it's about marking time, and it's about marking time in a very simple way within a place with little other to do. But drawings can be plans, so they can be very blueprint, which might then grow into something like that. That is the National Art School in Sydney, so an amazing diagram, a blueprint that was transported across the world and then remade in three-dimensional form. And an image which then tells the history of a place like the National Art School, like the Old Jail, which is the story of Tate Britain by Adam Dant, which was commissioned actually when Tate Modern opened. And it's an aged piece of paper, so it's coloured, it's discoloured. It talks about cartoon language, it has these vignettes of information about the narratives that have taken place. So it can talk to an overlaid history through the devices that it uses. So it uses a plotting mechanism, it talks to the plan of the Tate, it talks to the plan of the jail with a rotunda in the middle, which could be a panopticon, and then those other narratives which talk about the history of the museum and the history of its original site. But drawing can tell us about serious things, it can tell us about emotive things with haptic distortion, it can talk to us about hugely challenging things, you know, this kind of very vociferous creature, the heartless roach eating this other creature by the South African artist Ansel Crooge. And it can collect together, it can't always be condensed to one image, so it might become more diary-like, more as a presentation, like the Emmental book with bits of images, bits of text. It might need all of those clues. And it can also talk to us about absence. Well, we have the idea of the absent black history being made present within this drawing by Barbara Walker, again, which is in the Journal Drawing Prize this year. So it can be used to analyse, to contextualise, to represent an issue or a narrative. The idea of the book, the private space, the collage, so drawing fulfills all of these things. The imprint, so drawings made into wet handmade paper with string, which talk to us about being embedded back into the ground, into a surface. So these coffins, it was a project with the V&A about the idea of coffins and the way obviously that they disintegrate back into their ground. But to talk about the body through imprint, through this drawing by Cornelia Parker, which has the idea of being a Rorschach print, but also obviously talking about the body, to video, which might talk about the way something emerges and transforms in front of us, but it's made with a process of drawing, and I'm not going to play it, I'll play it later. But a drawing which pulsates, it's made with ink suspended in water, it's made with a pointed stylus, but it's documented through the video, and it morphs and changes. It's called Singularity, but we can play it at the end. To things which talk about the nature of issues, about the global positioning system, things which talk about how we collect the world into this small article, a small phone, but it's made of components all over the world. This is an animation which you actually need to see to gather the whole thing. To things which are playful, about systems, about measuring how we might be given rules to make marks, or things that are again about the throwaway, the idea of doodling, of playing on the coffee cup, and things which are obsessive about their detail. This is a huge drawing made with biro. It's a throwaway medium, it's made of biro and poster paint, but it talks very obsessively to how we construct a space, how we connect to another world through souvenir, through a gateway into a space, through the images, the tourist images. And drawings as performance, so drawings which are made through performance and exist as real, tangible drawings, but they're made in a performative zone with Jade Montserrat. Or a Joan Jonas performance that makes the drawing through the shadow of the performance at the back. So you have things which move into theatre, into presentation, things which use real materiality to talk to us about uncomfortable things. So the Sheila Gowder piece, Behold, which I think is still on show at Tate Modern now, is made with 4,000 metres of human hair. So the hair becomes the drawn material into the space. It sits as a heavy black, very certainly human stuff, and it's played with through that space to talk about the way that hair is tied to bumpers in India, so there are car bumpers, and that kind of processing and cheapness of life, and a lot more complicated things too. Drawing might be collaborative, and I'm kind of interested in the idea that we think it's a singular activity. So this project with the artist Jerry Davis, whose drawing you've already seen, which was about going into spaces to discover how you find a visual equivalent to a physical sensation. So their drawings based on a project out of Turner's drawings in caves in the Lake District, and going down into deep dark spaces to then make marks which are equivalent. And this took a whole batch of students out into the Jenolan Caves in Sydney to come back to make a composite drawing about what it was like to be in the cave, what that bodily sensation was, what the atmospheric sensation was, and how to transcribe that into marks through whatever kind of materiality they could find, to things which are fun and playful collaborative drawings through the big draw, to things where people might just come to make a mark, to imprint. And I'm intrigued about the idea of the community through drawing, and the idea that people might need to go and draw together, not to have a conversation about their drawing, but to go and draw together as a companionable thing. And to think about the idea of the laboratory, to think about a shared process and activity. These are both back at Drawing Projects UK, with a space where people can come as a safe space, a trusted space to think about drawing. So they can come to make drawing, to look at drawing, and to talk about drawing. And drawing might operate in a different space. It might operate in terms of a sound, and this description, it's not going to play for me at all, is it? On here. Just give me a breath, if it will play.
Jars with short necks, flared rims, which may be rolled or undercut, and are often close to lid seated, and may have one or two grooves below the neck. Medium hard, grey-brown, with a grey core and a blackened exterior surface, and a little muscovite. Distorted vessel, probably local, in a hard grey fabric with a lighter core and a little muscovite and dark grits, hard red-brown with a medium grey core and black surfaces, scattered minute muscovite and some quartz.
So the idea again about drawing being of its stuff, the equivalence of its form, its materiality, being meaningful to what we're talking about. So the idea of charcoal as a crackling, vulnerable medium, to ink as being something very unalterable. But the idea of making things that are equivalent to that experience, so things which are about the experience of making images through the Gaston, to something that might be incredibly simple as a drawing, but because it's just made with torn paper, so a Picasso skull. But to think about actually drawing within the whole latitude that it has, that it might be about space, it might be about a mark on a surface, it might be about making an imprint, it might be about a plan, it might be about a proposition, it might be a sophisticated piece of code that enables us to experience something in augmented reality. It might be just simply making a line on a piece of paper. I wanted just to take you through a sense of a field of drawing and its applicability, and the sense that drawing is a fundamental tool for creative discovery, but also in terms of actually the way that we can apply it in a whole different set of contexts as a dialogic medium, a communication medium, but something that actually sits certainly as a visual language that carries knowledge and understanding. It also carries feeling, it carries and communicates in a very sophisticated way. And I really just simply wanted to share that with you today as part of the context for Elastic Space, where we started this project in conversation with the freehand 3D drawing tool, with the Sandy tool, and thinking again about how the hand and that very direct space between thinking and realising an image, and the speed within which we make those decisions, and the speed with either how we capture them, and actually thinking more about whether it's about the capturing and leaving the trail and the trace as much as it is about the performance of making itself. And those drawings that I make are very certainly about the performance of making them as much as they are about the image rendered. And I think for me it's that trace within the process that enables us the access to understand where we want to understand appearance and where we need to understand appearance as standing for something else. And I'm going to stop there before my lack of caffeine gives in. But thank you for listening. I'm very happy to take questions, and I'm very happy to show you the moving image piece as well.
Thank you.